Okay. First of all, I'm Frank Price, and I live in Cote d'Ivoire. And a little trivia about Cote d'Ivoire, actually. It's the world's largest producer of cacao. And at some point in the process of going from cacao to chocolate, it becomes cocoa. But we'll get into that later. Chocolate itself, as you know, or maybe you don't know this, it actually kind of originated in probably Brazil. And it moved its way up, migrated up to the central area of Mexico, Central America, that area. And that's where we think about it as having its origins, even though really it's from further south in Brazil. Another thing about chocolate that's kind of important to keep in mind, why we don't have chocolate plantations in Sacramento or Eureka or Portland, Oregon, is that it takes a certain weather condition. So generally, chocolate grows about 20 degrees above the equator and 20 degrees below the equator. Hawaii is an exception, but it's pretty much that area. And it's a complex food, like we talk about wine being complex, has a lot of chemicals. Chocolate's the same way. It's also known as theobroma cacao, which is the food of the gods. That's the Latin word or phrase for it. So chocolate, as you know, is consumed all over the world. And I've discovered there are people that do not like chocolate whatsoever. By and large, most people like chocolate. Now, I'm not going to be talking about candy. If you thought about Kit Kat bars or Milky Way or M&Ms, those are candy that have a lot more sugar and I would say a lot less chocolate. Cacao also gets used in cosmetics, facial creams, and hand lotions. I don't sell any, so I'm not trying to promote one. Chocolate has a couple of words that you hear oftentimes: ganache, which is actually a mixture of chocolate and cream, or couverture, which is a covering. If you went to See's Candy and you bought their chocolate truffles, their couverture, their covering, is made by a company called Guittard, which is in Millbrae. So it gets used a lot. The hulls themselves get used in gardens. Down where I live in the Bay Area, there was a time you could buy chocolate hulls to put in your garden, but it's a kind of a problem for dogs, so we don't do that. Chocolate also is in some medications. I don't know which ones specifically, but there are some health benefits from chocolate because it's high on antioxidants, high in flavonoids, high in calcium. And there's roughly, I haven't counted them all, about 600 different compounds in chocolate. So it's a complex food. And of course, the value of chocolate is related to its flavor. And if you think of Scotch, I don't know if any of you drink Scotch or not, we sometimes think of single malt Scotch, like Macallan 12-year-old Scotch would be from one area in Scotland primarily. Chocolate's similar. Chocolate can be blended from different places. You could have plantations in Madagascar, Peru, Grenada, or you could have just a plantation in Madagascar and get your cacao from there. Now, I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the history of chocolate and cacao, and then I'm going to explain how it's made overall. But before I tell you how it's made, I'm going to tell you most companies that take the beans and turn it into a bar go through more or less the same process, but it's the more or less that often makes a difference in the quality of chocolate, or the flavor you get, and also where the chocolate comes from. It's kind of like terroir in wine. In France, champagne has to come from Champagne. You can sell sparkling wine, but from any place in France. But if you want champagne, it's got to be from the Champagne region. Now today, roughly, worldwide, there's about 4.8 million tons of cacao produced to make chocolate products. And most of those are grown a bar across and I'll show you that in a second, across the earth from about 20 above and 20 below the equator. Now, cacao doesn't grow like, this is one cacao tree, a Theobroma cacao tree. It doesn't grow like apple trees. I have apple trees, and you pick the fruit off of them, and they're at the end of the branches. Cacao grows on trunks, and it comes in different colors. This is one kind of cacao. So from this to this, when you open it up, Matter of fact, my very first time I ever had cacao raw, I was in a plantation near my town called Giglo, and a student took a machete and cut it open and said, "This is chocolate." And I thought, "Wow, I have chocolate growing from trees." Well, it doesn't taste that great, but that's what cacao looks like when it comes right out of that. So it goes from the bean to the bar. And we're going to talk a little bit about the shininess and about the snapping of it later. Like I said, roughly that many tons of cacao. And you can see roughly that Africa grows 72%. It's hard to get really accurate numbers sometimes. Latin America, about 16%, and Asia and Oceania, about 12%. I could say that most chocolate bars are not made in those countries. There is a trend now where countries that produce cacao, raw cacao, are now making chocolate bars. But by and large, Europe and North America are the largest manufacturers of chocolate bars. If you can see on this map, the dark brown are countries where the chocolate is made. And the lighter brown is where it's manufactured. And so some of them overlap a little bit. Used to be that somebody figured out the average American, I'm not sure what average means, would consume around 11 pounds of chocolate a year. That means in bars, cereals, treats, candy, etc. Switzerland had the highest amount. I'm not honestly sure if that means because tourists go to Switzerland and they buy more chocolate there than elsewhere, but Switzerland does grow quite a bit. India, by the way, is a large producer of cacao as well. Now, it used to be kind of like with grapes, we all know Pinot Noir, and vintners have clones of Pinot Noir. So in Napa, you might go to 10 different vineyards and they'll have 10 different clones or 20 different clones of Pinot Noir. They're Pinot Noir, but slightly different. Well, it used to be that there were three kinds of cacao. Forastero, which is the most common. Cote d'Ivoire, I think, still leads in production of Forastero. They're kind of green and yellow. You get Criollo, which is a different flavor, which is kind of a reddish purple. And you get a Trinitario, which is kind of a hybrid of the two. And now, thanks to a company that's been around a long time, whose name just escaped my brain, there's a couple others. There's Nacional pods. They're kind of a yellowish. And Ruby. You may see Ruby chocolate. To me, flavor and taste is subjective. So if I hold up this bar, this is Dandelion chocolate made in San Francisco. I don't know if you can see that. It's made in San Francisco. I like this brand. It's from Ecuador. But you might like something like this, which is actually is not pure chocolate, but it's called burnt caramel from Alter Eco. And I don't own stock in these companies. I'm just showing you that it's your flavor, what you like. Now, how does it get from bean to bar? Well, first of all, you have to take the pods off of a tree. And in this case, it's an African woman doing that. Then you have to harvest them. Now, this is a picture of different beans. You can see them. They're sorting through them. They're going to open them up and put them through the first stage. Now, there are many different companies that grow cacao, and there are many different countries that grow cacao. Cote d'Ivoire happens to be the largest producer. Ghana is a pretty big producer. Nigeria is a big producer. One of the difficult things is actually tracing the origin of cacao because Cote d'Ivoire is internationally known for having a problem with child labor, that they are not good to children, and in some cases, they're not quite slaves, but they can't leave the plantation. So cacao sometimes gets shuttled from Cote d'Ivoire to Ghana and then leaves Ghana, and people say, oh, it grew in Ghana. So it's a little hard to keep track of it. But when they get them there, they then open them up. You can see what it looks like, nice and neat. And they're then put on the ground. All those white beans are put on the ground, usually over banana leaves. They're covered, and the fermentation process starts, much like the fermentation process in making wine. Now, the length of time that it ferments adds to the quality of the chocolate. But then again, the longer it ferments means it takes more land to cover up the ground with banana leaves, And while they're doing that, nothing else is happening. So some people rush their fermentation. Some people ferment the pods in the beans rather in stalls, like in a barn. So there's different ways, but primarily, traditionally, it's like this. Then they're laid out to dry. Of course, this is, you can tell this is a posed picture. I mean, but they lay them out there to dry. And because it's a tropical area, they get lots of sunlight, it dries. Then after it's dried, they get bagged up and they go somewhere. Now the somewhere depends upon, oops, second. Wait a second here, what happened? There you go. The somewhere could be in the country, such as Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, or it could go to on a boat to France or Belgium or Switzerland. Well, not to Switzerland by boat, but to Switzerland. And at that point, the beans may be clean and they're winnowed so that the outer shell, it's kind of like a peanut, has a shell on the outside. That shell comes off and then they're roasted. This is just one type of roaster. It's kind of like roasting coffee beans. There's a similarity there. How they roast them, the temperatures they roast them at, depends on the company. Some companies share that knowledge, some companies do not. And of course, roasting machines can be much bigger. You can actually do this at home yourself if you really wanted to, but I really wouldn't recommend it. I don't think it's just a second. What's the problem here? There we go. Now, once the nibs, which are the roasted, ground roasted beans, are put into a mélangeur. Mélange in French means to mix up. It gets ground up, and you can see looks pretty good. Now, this is just dried, roasted, ground chocolate beans. Not a bad taste, but not something you'd probably like. Then this is put in a press. Now, this press is actually from a very famous restaurateur, at least in California, who hosted Gavin Newsom's party at his restaurant in Napa. I don't know if you know his name. Maybe I shouldn't mention it, but he also makes chocolate, and he makes chocolate with olive oil rather than with cocoa butter. But this is his factory in Napa. So if you, I don't want to say you get taken to the laundry, but sorry, this is his device. And when they press it, what they do is they press out the cocoa butter. Okay, and here's the cocoa butter. It's kind of a yellowish, pale mass. And what's left they call liqueur, but it's not a liqueur. There's no liquor in it. There's no alcohol in it. It's just a cocoa mass. And this cocoa butter will then be put back in and has other uses. Now, cocoa butter has a long shelf life. I think when I was a kid, they told me Twinkies would survive a nuclear war with the cockroaches and they'd be the only things left alive. Well, cocoa butter is kind of like that. It has a very long shelf life and it has a lot of uses. Now, conching is the next stage. And conching is a process that can be 12 hours, 48 hours, 36 hours, even longer. And essentially, if you rub your hands together, you'll notice your hands get warm, they get hot. But you're not going to burn your skin doing it, but it gets hot. If you do it for a long time, you'll start to get skin kind of peeling off and things like that. Conching is kind of that process where the chocolate is pressed and rolled back and forth, hours and hours and hours. And it makes the chocolate better and better and better tasting. Some companies do it for many, many hours, like 72. Some do it for 24. Some do it for 12. I guess officially you could say the longer you conch the chocolate, the better the flavor will be if you've done everything else correctly. Now, tempering the chocolate is pretty important. And tempering essentially means you're raising and lowering the temperature so that the crystals of the chocolate line up. And the better you temper it, if you've ever done this at home, you can probably do with chocolate, you will get a very shiny chocolate. And the crystals line up, when you go to sample your chocolate, it should crack. Now, if Hershey's, which is made in a town called Hershey, Pennsylvania, I don't know if it's related to the name. Just kidding. Hershey's, when you buy a Hershey's bar, you're buying a chocolate bar that has a lot of sugar and hasn't been tempered that much, so it more bends than breaks. Now, one of the things that goes into it, as a chocolate judge, we do often get to judge the packaging. And I have here, these are different bars of mine that I've had over time. Amano is actually made in Utah, where it says Plantation Mocaya. That's a French brand called Michel Cuizel. What's really interesting about Michel Cuizel, it's made outside of Paris. And you all know Paris is in France. Yet one of their, I guess you say their symbols, their logos, is the Mexican god Quetzalcoatl, who is not from Paris. Then you have Pralis, which is Ghana. And Pralis is one of my favorite brands. They have, I'm not sure right now, but they have maybe 8, 9 brands of chocolate bars from different parts of the world. They all tell you the longitude of the bar, and they tell you that they're all used to all be 75%. The next one, where the pink is one of my favorite brands because it was started by 2 Peace Corps guys in Madagascar. And they made their chocolate in Madagascar. Now they've moved some of their operations to Rwanda, and they do some of their chocolate making there. One of them lived in Berkeley, but he had to move to Belgium, poor guy. So he went there, and now they take care of their brand overseas. Fruition, which is in New York State, also makes a really nice chocolate. And if you look at the bars, they will all tell you percentage of cacao. This is from the Dominican Republic, it's 77. The Madagascar, which is Madagascar, is 70. The Pralis is 75. The other one is 66. And the last one that I started with is Amano. And I can't read this to tell you what it says. Taza chocolate is a very unique brand. It's made in Massachusetts, and it's grainy. All the other chocolates are smooth and shiny, very good. Taza makes kind of a bar that would have been made a long time ago, before certain processes were understood. Now, the next thing about chocolate is it's important to advertise what you're selling. And these are old posters. I don't know if I've seen any new posters for chocolate, but you have chocolate. This is a meal in itself. You have chocolat Meunier, which is it says en vente partout. You can buy it anywhere. You have Bristol chocolate, and of course, when I eat a Bristol chocolate, I run a race. I look just like that guy. You have other brands. You have an Italian brand. You have the one from Barcelona, and you have Cadbury's from England. And Cadbury's actually revolutionized the workforce for chocolate by building villages where chocolate could be made, and the workers would have better, I guess you'd say, better living conditions than maybe elsewhere. So chocolate has its own history. Now, I'm going to leave you with, I'm not finished, but I'm going to leave you with the pictures. This is actually from the museum in San Francisco. And in Ghana, they make coffins that are very, I guess, related to what they do. And so this is a coffin for a chocolate farmer. And it would hold, I mean, it's life size. So if you put yourself in it, you'd be inside of a giant metal cacao bean. And of course, Ghana is known for elaborate costumes, coffins rather, very, very fascinating. Before I go on, I'm going to stop the share screen part. Do you have any questions about what I told you? Any questions at all? Questions?
So I have one, and I'm not sure.
Chris.
I had to step away for a minute, so I don't know if you answered this already, but other than when it says 71% or 75%, what's the other percentage?
Good question. First of all, just the percentage doesn't necessarily tell you how good it is. It tells you the amount of cocoa mass in there. So the rest of it, for example, I'll just read you this bar. I don't know if you can see it. This is called Original Beans. It's from a country called Ecuador. This is milk chocolate. So milk chocolate's a little different. But if you read the label, I still can read, I think. Just a moment. Okay, sorry, it took me a little while here. Has raw cane sugar, cocoa butter, whole milk powder, cocoa mass, fleur de sel, milk solids, cocoa solids, etc. But if you read a bar like this one, which is from Ecuador, this is 70%, and it's primarily cocoa beans and sugar. That's it. Now, some of them have an emulsifier. An emulsifier, it's kind of like when you have mayonnaise and you make mayonnaise, you have to do something to keep it from separating. And an emulsifier does that. But some brands don't have emulsifiers. Now, this doesn't mean that 30% is sugar. There's cocoa butter in here, obviously. Cocoa beans includes the cocoa butter and the cocoa. So it doesn't necessarily tell you everything that's in here, but but this is a good bar for lots of other reasons, not just the percent, which is only 70. It's good because where it's grown, it has its own terroir, the way they produce it, the way they ferment it, the way they conch it. This is going to have a really good flavor. And again, I don't own these companies, but you can go on tour. Well, I shouldn't say you can. You used to be able to go on tours of factories where they made chocolate. I can't speak for any of them now because of COVID. If you buy a bar like this one, which is Alter Eco, which I think is fun, this is a 70% cacao, but it also has the other 30% is organic raw cane sugar, caramel granulates, organic cane sugar, organic glucose syrup, organic cream, organic butter, water, sea salt, and so on, and a whole bunch of other things, butterfat, etc. So what's the other part also adds flavor to it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Anybody else?
I had a question. So I have purchased and used cacao nibs.
Yeah.
So that is just like and I've done a tour on the Big Island of Hawaii, saw them growing the cacao and then the whole processing thing. So the nibs are basically just cleaned, crushed seeds where the outer shell's been taken off,
right?
And nothing's added to a cacao nib, right?
Exactly. It's just it's like a shelled walnut.
Right. And it does. If you've never tried it, it's an interesting flavor. If you've been off sugar, it actually has a good flavor.
Yeah.
If you consume sugar, you probably won't like it.
I want to get one thing, just a second.
So Kathy, were those roasted? Or...
Yes, I believe they are, Chris. I believe they are roasted. Frank, Chris asked if they're roasted. I think cacao nibs are roasted.
Yeah, they're roasted. They're roasted. I was just looking. I had some Hawaiian chocolate. I went to a plantation there, and it was a small plantation. I can't remember the name of it. I've been lucky enough to be able to taste different Hawaiian chocolates. I think there's probably 3 or 4 bean to bar chocolate companies. Yeah, they're roasted. And actually, Scharfenberger used to sell cacao nibs, and they're great on ice cream. Or if you like maybe chocolate chip cookies without much sugar, they're good that way. Or just as a snack, cacao doesn't have as much caffeine in it as you think, but it's high. Like blueberries are really high in not flavonoids, but antioxidants, and cacao is actually higher than blueberries. So it's good. It's a good treat. I was just going to try to find my Hawaiian bar, but I gave it away to a neighbor. I like giving people chocolate. It's fun.
I have cocoa nibs from Monteverde, Costa Rica.
That's
Trap.
no. I'd like to have you pass that around, but I guess that's a little tough to do as we speak. I want to give you a little history of chocolate, because chocolate is it's an historical. What would I say? It's an important part of our history, and people sometimes don't realize how long it's been around. I told you that it went from Brazil to Mesoamerica, and of course, when the Spaniards got to Mexico, they weren't there as tourists. They weren't part of Friendship Force. They were pretty ruthless group. And one of the things about it is that the Aztecs drank it as a beverage. Now, at that time, when the Aztecs were making cacao, if you think of I guess I would call it a mole stick, where they would make a liquid out of it. There was no sugar in Central America. They had honey, they had bees, but they didn't have sugar. They would often put red pepper in there. They would put ground insects like crickets, and they would make that beverage. Now, when Montezuma was the king, he thought it was an aphrodisiac, and they used it also as money. Now, the Spaniards really weren't quite sure what to do with it. They did bring it back to Spain. Now, once it got back to Spain, it became kind of a drink only for the upper class, only for the wealthy. Now, Spain was a very devout Catholic country at this time in the 1500s. And I'm not Catholic, so I can't speak for Lent, but I guess in Lent, you're supposed to give up certain things. And the Spanish priests declared that chocolate or cacao was not really a food, so they didn't have to give it up. So they drank liquid chocolate. They could have it warm. They discovered if they put sugar with it, it even got better, because just plain cocoa can be kind of bitter. So they really began to like it. Now, unfortunately, the Spaniards were pretty ruthless in Peru, in Mexico, Central America, and they decided they wanted to grow cacao there because they realized it wasn't going to grow in Spain. So by virtue of them doing that, they destroyed much of the local population because of disease, because of slavery. So then they brought in slaves from Africa who had some immunity to things like malaria, which the Spanish didn't have an immunity to, but it kind of, malaria killed a lot of the Native Americans. So the slaves were brought in, and for quite a long time, Spanish used slave labor, of course, to build their churches, to do lots of things. And the natural Spanish diseases, when I say natural, I mean diseases that were endemic to Spain, also killed many of the Native Americans. So Spain kept the chocolate to itself. Well, it didn't last forever. There was a wedding between a French queen and a Spaniard, and the recipe for it came with her, or with him rather. And anyway, ultimately, cacao spread throughout Europe. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the very first, not coffee houses, but they were chocolate houses in England. Then coffee came along. The Spanish, of course, were very successful, but the English were even more successful in stealing their products. They would attack the fleets and take the silver and the gold and the cacao. And the English at first weren't quite sure what to do with it either, but eventually they realized that this was kind of a decent gift to people. So they kept the cacao and they used it as a food. But it's still a liquid. It's not a solid. People can't quite figure it out what to do with it. So, like I told you, in about 1657, the very first chocolate shop opened up. It was opened up by, of course, a Frenchman. And they served a drink there. People liked it. Then the Pope also declared, gosh, this is so good. It's my Latin is bad, but he made a judgment. I'm going to read it in Latin. And if my Latin is bad, just let me know. Liquidum non frangit jejunum. I guess mentioned that really chocolate didn't break the fast, so priests could eat chocolate, everybody else. And I guess the Easter Bunny at some point makes an entrance here. So chocolate is spreading throughout Europe. Zurich, Switzerland goes to, the mayor goes to Brussels, and chocolate kind of gets to Switzerland. The Swiss, as you may know, have cows, and their cows make excellent milk, excellent butter. So the Swiss kind of start dabbling in chocolate. Well, chocolate goes from Europe to America. Now, does anybody know the name of the first, it's still around, I think, first chocolate company in America that made chocolate, sold chocolate, made chocolate? Still around. I can buy it at Safeway, I think. Anybody have an idea?
Nestle?
No, Nestle's has always been Swiss. It still is today. It's an American company.
Ghirardelli?
No, that's a good
More
guess.
recent.
But this is much older than Ghirardelli.
Hmm.
Ghirardelli was founded by two brothers who came up from South America, by the way. And they're now owned by another company.
Hmm.
Anybody? Okay, anybody bake?
It's
What's a good chocolate for people who bake?
Oh,
What?
no.
Bakers?
Bakers! You got it.
Bakers?
Yeah, bakers. Now there's a moral to the story here. The wife, there was a man who started Baker's Chocolate, whose name I don't remember. It probably doesn't matter, but he started Baker's. However, he went out to sea, disappeared, never came back. His wife remarried, and it became Baker's Chocolate. they say he probably was out there catching whales or trying to catch whales. So for a long time, chocolate is still made in as a liquid. It can be cold or hot, but it's not going to be a bar. Then, believe it or not, it goes all the way to Switzerland. They make the very first bar. Now, one of the things that really helps the spread of chocolate is the Industrial Revolution, because prior to that, everything kind of had to be done by hand or animal power. So to grind the chocolate, you had to probably have horses or cattle using a grinding wheel. It's very slow, very laborious. But once they figured out how to harness water power, steam power, all of that, they could then use machines, and that really spread chocolate around the world. Now, every company had its secrets of blending beans, roasting beans, you name it. They were all kind of kept to themselves. The Swiss started kind of trying to figure out what to do with all this milk, and so they came up with milk chocolate. Now, milk chocolate has a certain percentage of cacao, usually less than 50%. And the Swiss realized that they could add milk powder to it, and they could make a whole different kind of flavor to chocolate. It was softer, it was sweeter. And so they kind of get credit for inventing that. They also get credit for inventing the conching process, where they really would grind it, and they would do it for 72 hours in some cases. So chocolate now is pretty much a liquid. People eat it all over. But in the middle of about the 19th century, somebody in Switzerland comes up with making a bar, goes to England, they make bars. Bars become a process all over the world. And there's a variety of companies that are in the United States. I think for the longest time, there were maybe fewer than 5 companies that actually took beans and made bars, because it was an expensive process, but they could do it. So World War I comes along, and America gets into the war, and GIs get issued kits with food in it and chocolate bars. And they kind of spread it. They give it to little kids, and pretty soon American GIs are loved just because they have chocolate. And of course, in World War II, it even became more, the war was obviously a real world war, and GIs had chocolate wherever they went. And so chocolate became spread all over the world, partially because of that. So that today we have, it's not that people didn't eat chocolate, but it was hard to get. And now American GIs are giving them, here, have a Hershey's, well, I don't think they call it a Hershey bar, but have a chocolate bar. It became very popular. They became popular and well-liked. And so chocolate became a worldwide product. Now, for a long time, chocolate was not really consumed in Asia very much. China, Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, they weren't big consumers of chocolate. But today, they're all consuming more and more chocolate. And so chocolate is a finite, there's a finite amount of chocolate in the world. It's not, infinite. So the price of chocolate's going up. Now, the 3 types of bars, chocolates I showed you before, Forastero is the one that has the most immunity to diseases. Criollo has the least immunity. And the problem is there are plant diseases, there are animal diseases, and there's also climate change. So the amount of chocolate in the world is sort of, it's hard to say what it'll be 2 or 3 years from now. It could be more, it could be less. But chocolate's being grown in more places, and chocolate bars are being grown in more places. So essentially, chocolate has become a world product. There's, when you see the sign fair trade, it can be a little misleading. Fair trade means that somebody has set the price for the beans. In Madagascar, it used to be, I don't know now because it's hard to get good information now, but the guys that started the Peace Corps guys that started their company, they paid their workers more than fair trade because they made the chocolate on site, so they cut down on certain costs. So they didn't put fair trade on theirs because they were paying better than fair trade. So I don't know now what's going on, unfortunately. And of course, you can't, well, I shouldn't say you can't get sick eating chocolate. You'd have to eat a lot of chocolate to get sick. Now, dogs, I have one right next to me. You might hear her now and then. Dogs can't digest the chemicals in chocolate, so they get sick and it can be poisonous. For a human being to reach that level of danger, I think I read it once. I think it was like about, you'd have to eat 30 pounds at one time. Well, that's probably more than you would probably want to eat. And milk chocolate has even less chocolate in it. So I'm not sure how much, but don't do that at home. I don't want you to try doing that. Now, before I go on, do you have any other questions? I don't want to leave you behind.
Yeah, I have another question. So, do you know, you got that area where it grows in latitude, and is that because of the moisture level, or what is it that's special about that?
Two things. One is, except for mountaintops, obviously, like in Peru, the temperature is usually fairly warm. Like Cote d'Ivoire, where we live, Ivory Coast, it probably rarely gets below 70 degrees. It may go higher, but it doesn't go below that too often. It doesn't freeze. I don't think anybody ice skates in Cote d'Ivoire too often. But on the mountaintops, like in Peru and Ecuador, I don't believe they can grow any cacao up there. That's too high up. Hawaii works well because of the humidity and the temperature. California doesn't have enough humidity, and of course, I'm sure there must have been a frosty day in Sacramento at least once this year.
Oh yeah.
So that would damage your plants. Now, you could maybe grow them in greenhouses, but I think that would be less cost effective than you would want. So that's why they grow in that about 20 above and 20 degrees below the equator.
Okay, thanks.
Frank,
Yeah.
can chocolate, of the smart boys decide maybe we ought to use, change the gene to make it more, less susceptible to disease?
Well, I understand what you're saying. I think there's a lot of people that do not like genetically modified plants and foods. So I think that might be a problem. Oh, there's natural genetic selection where plants kind of self-select and they either make it or they don't. But as far as I know, nobody's done that. Now, there are people that have actually, how would I say it, mapped the genome of chocolate, just like they've done with flies and people and so forth. And I'm not sure, I'm not smart enough to even know how you would what genes to alter. I don't know that. I'm really limited. But it's possible, do you have any spare time?
Hey, Frank, would that hurt the panache, the cheechiness of chocolate if it was sold with a big GMO label?
Oh, I think it would probably kill it. But actually, I'm trying to think. Yeah, it would probably be bad for it. I don't think that people would accept that. But plants do mutate and change on their own. Now, the company that made Ruby chocolate, it'll come to me, I'll have to think of it, is a Belgian company. They claim it was a natural mutation, and that they took the natural mutation and made it into the Ruby chocolate. Again, I'm not smart enough to know how you could tell the difference between one or the other, because the genes are just the genes. They don't have a little tag on them that says I was modified. So I don't know.
Put the GMO label on it.
Well, next time I see an executive from one of those companies, I'll mention that. But when they throw things at me, I'll just catch them. Any other questions? Don't be shy. I can't bite anyway. Okay, let me just show you. I'm going to do is I'm going to take. I like chocolate actually, and I have to confess I love chocolate cake with good chocolate frosting. That's my favorite chocolate. It beats any bar I ever have, but don't have a lot of those. One of the things I forgot to tell you about chocolate is the reason it melts in your hand is because that's kind of the melting point of chocolate. Chocolate melts at about 95 degrees, 96 degrees, and most of you have a body temperature of about 98.6, more or less, except if you get that person who sticks the gun in your head and goes, oh, it's only 95. But generally, chocolate will melt in your hand. So I'm going to take a bar of mine. If you want to do the same now, let me just tell you a couple of things you can do. Chocolate really almost always goes well with something that's sweeter. So if you have port, it goes really well. Different champagnes, it goes really well. Different sparkling wines, it goes well. Cremant, Prosecco, it goes pretty well. If you are you all over 21?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure because I don't want to be, I don't want to be fostering anything, but I like it with rye whiskey. Now, rye whiskey isn't sweet, but I like it with rye whiskey. I can't tell you why. I like it with bourbon. I don't quite like it with scotch, but it depends. There's some scotches I'm willing to suffer and have it with scotch. The other thing about it is I'm going to open I'm going to take I have one's called endangered species, which is well, it's not, but I'll just tell you what this has in it. This says bittersweet chocolate, chocolate liqueur, which is not liquor. It's just the cocoa mass, sugar, cocoa butter, and soy lecithin and vanilla. So it doesn't have a lot of ingredients in it. The one thing that chocolate isn't probably good for is the fact that it does have a lot of fat. Now this bar, if I ate the whole bar, which I think I probably could do if I wanted to, has 11 grams of fat. Not necessarily good for you, perhaps. It has no cholesterol, no sodium, and it has a few carbs. It has a little bit of dietary fiber. So and if you're a vitamin D fan, has almost none. It has very little iron, little potassium, and no calcium. So it's not really a health food necessarily, but my dentist told me it's fine. So I'm going to open up this bar, and I'm going to notice that it's
Frank,
wrapped
this
in
is a quick question. Do
Yeah.
you live local, Frank?
I live in
Are
Berkeley.
you in Sacramento area?
No, they wouldn't let me in
Okay,
there. I live in
because
Berkeley.
we have a chocolate place that's for the locals out at the Palladio, and they do pairings with different wines.
That's difficult.
And so you can do chocolate tasting with wine, and
You
it's
can.
all by the kind of chocolate that you're tasting.
Yeah, if there used to be I think it's still there. Cardinelli is a winery. I want to say it's in Napa, but I could be wrong. They were pairing their wines with Scharfenberger for a while. But because of things shutting down and opening up and shutting down, I have no idea what really anybody's doing. But yeah, a lot of people like Pinot Noir with it, or sometimes Zinfandel. I think it has to be a sweeter wine rather than a dry wine. What's the one? Begins with an M.
Merlot.
Wine. What?
Merlot.
Merlot. Some people like Merlot and chocolate. It's really it's really your taste buds, Kathy. I wish I could tell you what's right and what's not, but it's your taste buds, really. Now I'm going to open this up, and I'm not going to eat all of it. I don't know if you can see it, but it's kind of shiny. I'll hold it that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the shiny because the tempering, and then they put it in molds, and this has the name of it. I used to do chocolate tastings for companies, and I'd say, don't look at the chocolate too closely because you might see the name of it on there. But I don't think you can read this. So that's it shows you it was put in a mold and it was tempered. And I'm gonna see if you can hear me. I'm gonna break it. Could you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, that tells me that at least this was made the right way. And now as a judge, I'm supposed to adhere to certain standards. So I'm going to take off just one of these little squares. There we go. And I'm going to break it again. Well, maybe I can't. I'm going to bite a little piece, and I'm going to let it sit on my tongue. Now, people who are wine sommeliers have a lot of words for wine. People for chocolate do the same. I tend not to be that way. I'm kind of, I don't taste grass or wheat or dirt in my food unless I have grass, wheat, or dirt in it. I tend to taste chocolate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bite a little bit and let it sit on my tongue. Now, you know that your tongue has different taste receptors in different locations. But I'm also going to smell it. And if I'm going to rub it. This will kind of loosen the molecules. Now I can smell it tasting like chocolate. I don't smell grasshoppers. I don't smell bourbon. I just smell chocolate. But I rub it. Of course, that makes it less shiny. But it makes the molecules go air. Now, if it's an old chocolate, if this were really old chocolate, it has what's called a bloom, which is really the cocoa butter rising to the top. If you think of if you've ever been to an old Victorian home that was built in the 1880s, and you look at the glass, and you'll see the glass has waves in it, and it looks like it has maybe bubbles in some places. If it's really old, that's because the glass is really a liquid, a very slow moving liquid. And over 100 years, 200 years, the glass will sort of come down a little bit. So you have a different thickness, you'll get wavy. Well, chocolate's a little like that in that if you let it sit for a long time, the cocoa butter will begin to kind of separate and you'll have a white, kind of yellow white, they call it a bloom. It's not harmful. It just means it's old. Now, if you get really old chocolate and it turns to powder, I wouldn't want to eat it. But other than that, it's okay. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to bite it, I'm going to put it into my mouth, and I'm going to let it sit on my tongue and see if it melts. Now, I know I have a body temperature of about 98.6. I was just at the doctor's yesterday. So I'm going to test this.
Put it in your mouth.
I'm going to crunch it a little bit to break it up.
Yeah, it melts.
It tastes rich to me. Now some chocolates will have a much more fruity flavor. Some people will, I like this actually. If I suck on it a little bit, like it's a straw, I can sense different flavors. I will tell you the worst chocolate I've ever had in my life was a chocolate bar made with crayfish. And it was god awful. I won't even tell you the name if I could remember it, but it was just horrible. Now, I like that chocolate. I let it sit. I'm talking, of course. I probably wouldn't if I were tasting it. I'm going to have a little bit of water. Now, one of the things I don't drink with chocolate is milk. I love milk. I drink a lot of milk. I love milk. I love milk with chocolate cookies and chocolate cake. If you need my mailing address, I can give it to you if you want to send me some. But with chocolate bars, I'm just kidding. With chocolate bars, however, I don't like milk because it kind of coats my tongue. So I would have had wine or something else, but I'm going to make dinner in a little while. So I guess I have to still stay sober. Any questions so far?
No question, but a comment. We have 3 different bars, and
Okay.
so I think 70,
71.
71, 80,
81,
81 and
and
90.
Wow.
Oh,
Quite
90.
different flavor. The 90 is the more bitter, yes, of course. And the 80, I don't know, it has coconut sugar and vanilla bean in it. So maybe that changed the flavor a little bit.
It will.
Yeah. And so
Vanilla will do that too.
yeah.
Vanilla beans from Madagascar are supposed to be very good, and they get used in chocolate. But vanilla is a very strong flavor, so it will change it. Anything else? Any other questions, comments, thoughts, ideas?
Go ahead.
Yes.
So I'm questioning, where do you get your supply when having that many different
Well,
companies?
when
Do
I-
you do that online?
Well, I used to actually, if I were doing, let's say, 150 people, I don't go to Berkeley Bowl and buy 150 candy bars. I go online. I usually buy it from the manufacturer if it's possible. I did have problems with that. Prowess is one of my favorites. And Prowess used to have delivery. I don't know, their supply chain was not very good. And I wrote to them. Actually, I was kind of embarrassed. I wrote to them a couple of times. And one of my best friends went to Paris, went to a chocolate thing and a chocolate show, and went to the Prowess booth and said he knew me. And they all said, "Oh, you know Frank Price." He writes to us all the time. But it's hard to, if I'm doing like for tonight, if you were at my house tonight, I would just go to Star Market, which is on Claremont, or Berkeley Bowl, or I could go to San Francisco. and I'm embarrassed. I haven't been to San Francisco a lot recently, so I don't even know what's available. But on Market Street, there was a chocolate store there that had a lot of different chocolates. I don't know if they're there anymore. I haven't, you know, you can see my haircut's so good. But anyway, that's where I would go if you were coming over, because Star Market and Berkeley Bowl, or I would go to some of the chocolate makers. There are a few chocolate makers in the Bay Area. Dandelion is one. Michael Recudi is one. I'm trying to think of who else. My brain's a little. Oh, now Ghirardelli is made down the road, so to speak, in Hayward, and Ghirardelli is owned by a different company now. I want to say, is it Nestle's? No, Hershey. Nestle or Hershey bought Ghirardelli. They also, Nestle bought Scharfenberger and moved them to Indiana. So they're there now rather than they used to be in Berkeley. And there's a couple other small chocolate makers. So it sort of depends. Yes, Sandy.
You said you're in Berkeley. I'm having an 81% from Cho.
Cho, that's now in Berkeley. Yeah, that's now in Berkeley.
Yeah.
It's funny that started in San Francisco on one of the piers near where the Exploratorium is. And we met the guy who started it. He called himself a serial entrepreneur. And so they started using computers and technical equipment to tell them when the chocolate was going to be ripe in, let's say, Peru. He left the company, but I think they kept some of his equipment, but they moved from San Francisco to Berkeley. And Cho's is a fun chocolate. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah, it's different.
Somebody else have a question or?
Yeah,
Yeah, Glenn?
I have a bar of 70% Lindt,
Oh, yeah.
and after I melt it on my tongue, I find I have a rather bitter aftertaste.
Uh-huh. Good point.
Is that normal?
It may be normal for that bar. It really depends on the longer. Lindt is owned by Lindt and see who owns Lindt is owned by somebody else now, but that's their bar. That's what they do. There's a lot of bar manufacturers, when they do the conching, the longer they conch it, the less bitterness there is.
Oh,
But there's also kind of an idea. If you go to, let's say, I'll take Trader Joe's. If you go to Trader Joe's, you'll see a bar made by Valrhona. It's black. It has kind of like a red lightning bolt going down the center. That's their less, I don't want to say desirable, but maybe less desirable bar because they don't spend as much time making it. Yet Valrhona makes some exquisite chocolate. And Lindt does the same thing. They make more of a commercial brand, and then they make a more, how would I say it? I don't want to say, I guess I could say exquisite, better bar. So when you're judging, you do want to look at that aftertaste. Now, the one I have doesn't have a bad aftertaste. It's just the process of making the bar. I think I cut Kathy off, or did I? No?
No, but I
sorry.
do have a comment to make. So I think about a week ago, maybe it was 2 weeks, I'm not sure. I did a Zoom for some folks and opened it up to Eventbrite and had lots of folks from all over. And I explained the process of how to make truffles.
Oh,
And I have always used guittard chocolate.
they're excellent. They're excellent.
Yeah, we did it. It was using a mold. And so it was really fun. So I was so excited about your class to learn more about fancy chocolates.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Guittard. If you go to a C's candy store, Guittard makes the chocolate for the couverture, the covering for their truffles. They make a white. I'm not a big white chocolate fan, but Guittard makes a beautiful white chocolate. But you have to buy a 50-pound wheel, which is, maybe Sandy and her friends, that might last a week.
Maybe a Friendship Force
Yeah.
communal.
We used to go to the Fancy Food Show in San Francisco, and I highly recommend it. It hasn't been held. It was canceled last year, canceled this year, and my mother was a saver of lots of things, and I found an ad for Guittard chocolate from either the 50s or the 40s, and I showed it to them, and they all thought it was kind of fun because it's a family company. And they're in Millbrae. I don't know if you can have tours of their factory or not, but I check it out. They make delicious chocolate. They have names for their bars, and I'm trying to think of the names. that were kind of funny in a way to me. But they're good chocolate.
Frank,
Sandy,
I
you had
have
a
a
question?
question. I'm having a Madagascar 70%.
Is that the pink one?
Yes, but it says heirloom chocolate. Is there a
Oh.
reason behind the
Well-
term heirloom?
I think that a lot of words get used, but there is an organization of which I've been a member called the Fine Chocolate Institute of America. I can show you their hat. That's all I have left. And what they do is, it actually goes back to something that I can't remember his name, but he's asking me about genes. You can bring a sample of your chocolate to them. You can send it to them, and they will identify the history, if they can, of that bean, where it comes from, what its lineage, so to speak. Matter of fact, let me just get my hat. I have it here.
Oh, he's gonna get his hat.
This is
That way you can write to them if you want. I don't know if you can see the hat. Well, maybe you can't read it, can you? Well, if you had a chocolate bean and you send it to them, they'll tell you the genetic history of that bean. And so heirloom means, in a sense, it's an older bean. I don't know if there's actually a real definition. I'm embarrassed to say that the word could mean more than it does, because chocolate wasn't created originally in Madagascar. It ended up there because it's a great place to grow chocolate. So I'm not sure what the word heirloom, I mean, I hear it used, but this is a group that would let you know, the FCIA, Fine Chocolate Industry Association, would let you know its history. Because you can check, I don't know if you've ever done genetic testing on yourself, you can find out that, I have Neanderthal in my background, so maybe that explains why I am who I am. But you can get that information, and the same with chocolate. The more chocolate is tested, the more history they know. So heirloom, I don't know if that really.
Okay. I like this chocolate. I don't know if it's because of where it's made or if it's the percentage, but it has berry notes in the back of my taste buds.
My wife has about 10 bars of that 70%. She loves it.
Sandy, what chocolate was that one?
It's Madagascar.
Oh, that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I have this one, the Curacao, and it
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
says crafted with the exotic mystery of heirloom cacao.
Oh,
I
okay,
think
another
the
heirloom.
exotic mystery is the key.
Mystery.
It is the mystery.
But there are, I mean, it's, I'm trying to think if I could come up with anything else similar, but it's just who they are. I mean, they just like to use those words, and if you enjoy it, that's really the secret.
Yeah.
If you like the chocolate, if you don't like it, then,
It's like wine.
yeah.
Which variety do
Exactly.
you like?
I mean, I don't have any $2 chuck, but I've had it before, and some of it I liked, some of it I didn't. Anything else?
Buttery.
Yes, yeah, buttery and milky.
Very good.
Any other questions?
Very nice. Good way to start before dinner.
Some people say eat dessert first, so I'm that way. Well, I want to thank you all. If you need to write to me, both Chris and Nancy have my email.
Okay.
And it's been a pleasure being with you. I hope I didn't bore you to death.
No,
But,
not at all.
I
Very
like
informative.
chocolate.
Before you leave, Frank, we do want to thank you, but I also want you to send me that recipe for that meal made out of the peanuts.
I will do it.
Okay, I'll share it with everyone.
And just to let you know, if you have an allergy to peanuts, you can't eat it.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Right.
It was really a pleasure.
Thank you very much, all of
Thank
you.
you.
You take care.
Thanks, Frank.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you, Nancy.
Bye
See
bye.
you, see you at the next meeting.
You got it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Everybody. Good night.